Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. I've been wanting all year to call it, but I digress, but it's too late for that. And, of course, I digress just doing that. But and we're going to get right into it. This is the game, the 116th renewal of Ohio State versus Michigan. The game's going to be played in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which brings up sort of like blood-curdling Yale memories for some Ohio State fans from the 1990s. But things changed a lot in 2001 in this great game, this great rivalry, the greatest rivalry in college football, perhaps in sport. And it changed a lot because of the efforts of my first guest today. Before I get to him, though, Ohio State is coming off a hard-fought win over Penn State. Hard-fought because Ohio State made it that way, kept stepping on its shoelaces with 3 major turnovers, which kind of changed that game around. Ohio State still escapes Penn State 28-17, clinches the Big Ten East Division championship for the 3rd straight year, and 2 weeks from now we'll be playing for its 3rd straight Big Ten championship. Crazy. That one's already in the bag. But we all know that bragging rights are what's on the line this week. They always have been ever since Ohio State and Michigan decided to start playing each other. And those bragging rights had waned through 2000 during the John Cooper years when Ohio State sagged to 2-10-1 against Michigan. It was almost dreaded. Here comes the Michigan game again. But along came a coach from Youngstown State, formerly an Ohio State assistant coach named Jim Tressel, and he vowed that those things would change in, 310 days as soon as he was named the successor to John Cooper. And lo and behold, they did. But what a crazy ride it was to that, what I call it, the Le Source win in what's turned out to be a 16-2 run by Ohio State in the greatest rivalry in sports. And nobody knows more about that change of what do you want to call it, demeanor for the Ohio State football program than my first guest, a guy who was a quarterback of some great repute and is right now trying to sell insurance and still tell people what football is all about. Craig Krenzel, welcome to the Tim May Podcast.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Sorry about that long intro, man. I was going to build you up even more, but we'll do that as this goes along. Real quick, before we get into 2001 and the way life changed for Ohio State football fans, what's your impression of this Ohio State team, 2019, coming off that win over Penn State where they tried to give it away? Penn State wouldn't take it, kept taking it back to the window. But what's just your take on this team as it heads toward the Michigan game? What do they got going right, and what do you want to see kind of change?
I don't know that anything's really got to change. When you look at this Buckeye football team this year in terms of what they got going right, I think across the board it's a little bit of everything. They're extremely talented offensively, defensively, weapons everywhere, playmakers everywhere making plays. The biggest thing, like we saw on Saturday, and it's really the first time we've seen it all year, is just you got to execute. You got to execute. You got to take care of the football. 3 costly turnovers made Saturday's game against the Nittany Lions, at least on paper, or in the box score, made it look like it might have been a game. But if you really watched the game, if you were there or you watched it on TV, it really wasn't a game. I think it was a truly dominating performance. I think there were, like I said, 3 plays in that game that went against the Buckeyes, and there were plays that we put on ourselves. And anytime you do that in football, it can be tough to overcome. But like I said, when you look at the overall landscape of this football game on Saturday, it wasn't close. It wasn't an 11-point game on the field in terms of anybody that knows football watched knows that the Buckeyes dominated that football game. It was only 14-0 at half, but clearly physically dominated by the Buckeyes. And it just goes to show you that truly is how good they are this year. And my hope for this football team is for 2 more games, they can go out there and execute execute rather, do what they're supposed to do, and give us all as fans an opportunity to see them in the playoffs. Because I want to see this team against Clemson or LSU or Georgia or Alabama or whoever the heck it ends up being. This is the first time in a long time that I think I can say at least, and that a lot of people feel the same way. It's the first time in a long time where I look and say, you know what, I do want to see us play those teams because we are that good.
Yeah, I was going to say, Saturday, like you're talking about, I just do that, what can they get better at, just to see if you had anything to say. But Saturday kind of reminded me against Penn State about a rich family putting out a bread line for some other people to maybe enjoy a little bit of meal before they finally went back into their big house, and that's what Ohio State did, took care of business. Speaking of the big house, and I didn't even mean that segue, take me back to 2001. Let's just set this up big time. 2001, Steve Belisario is a starting quarterback. You know, you guys are kind of had a hit and miss season, but you're still kind of you're still playing for possibility to be in the race for the Big Ten championship, headed toward the Illinois game. And then all of a sudden, something happens on a Thursday night, and Steve Belisario had a moment he would rather forget. Maybe he never even remembered it, if you follow my drift. But, suddenly Scotty McMullen is named the quarterback. Steve is suspended by Jim Tressel, or at least, he's not going to get to play. You're the backup quarterback. Take me back to those moments. What changed for you? Did you did you have a sense that things were about to change big time for you? Or how do you remember that little segue?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I remember is, Steve Belisario is a dear friend of mine.
Yeah.
Still is to this day. Was my roommate at the time, and nobody wants to see, regardless of any situation or what can transpire after that, for personal gain. Nobody ever wants to see a close friend or a family member, go through something like that. We've all made decisions in our life, and I'm sure you have too, Mr. May.
Yes.
But that we wish we could have back to whatever degree, and obviously that's one of those situations for Steve-O. And to this day, I wish things would have transpired in terms of me getting an opportunity to play in a different fashion. But obviously, we're not always in control of that, and to me, it was just kind of another example in life of the importance of preparation and just kind of always being prepared for whatever your opportunities may come and being able to recognize those opportunities and run with them. And that season, we actually kind of went back and forth week in and week out. Of one weekend I would be number 2, the next weekend Scott would be number 2.
Right.
And the weekend, the next game we'd go back and I would be the backup, and then the weekend after that was just kind of the way Coach Tress was playing things. And as the rotation shook out, actually going into that Illinois week, that was Scott's week to be the backup.
Yeah.
So when everything happened with Steve, it was just, Coach Tress wasn't going to change anything, and it was kind of understood that there was a really good chance that we were both going to play. And so I knew Scott was going to start, and we came out in the first half, and I think Jonathan Wells, just like he did when I was able the next week to get the start against Michigan, J-Dubs came out and had a real nice first half, and we moved the ball a little bit, but not a ton offensively.
Right. And
that allowed myself to step on the field there in the second half, and we made some nice plays toward the end of the game, and we were right there. We were right there with a chance to in our own house take a win from the eventual Big Ten champions, Illinois.
Right.
And they scored to take. We had taken the lead, I believe. They scored to take the lead back. They're kicking off to us there in the fourth quarter, toward the end of the game, and we struggled with the kickoff, and we muffed the ball and end up with it on our own 5 or 6 yard line or whatever it is, and then. I try to forget, but, sometimes, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, sometimes we make decisions we wish we could have back. And that was just for lack of a better way to put it, just a rookie mistake.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
didn't have a clear understanding of what was going on out in the flats, and I was just trying to get a quick 6 yards. And unfortunately, a guy by the name of Ty Myers for the Illini stepped out underneath an out route. just to the short side there. And, I think a lot of Buckeye fans remember what happened next. Pick six.
Dude, wait a minute. You remember
pretty much.
Yeah, you remember his name. I mean, that's why it stood out.
Oh, yeah. There's certain things in life you don't forget. I remember the guy who played quarterback in front of me my very first year of flag football when my dad was a coach and I had to play center. I'll never forget that name either.
Man. Yeah, of course you won't. Yeah.
But yeah. So, but I was fortunate enough, to be ready, to be prepared, and to do some nice things in that second half.
Yes.
And we moved the ball and we threw the ball pretty well for really being my first meaningful minutes. And I played well enough to earn the trust of Coach Tress and the staff to be named the starter for that following week up in Ann Arbor.
Let me interrupt you here, though. So, Craig, when did Coach Tressel? I don't think I've ever even asked you this. When did he precisely tell you you're the guy, you're going to be the starter? He'd obviously made that proclamation, 9-10 months earlier, or 11 months earlier. But when did he let you know you were going to be his guy?
I honestly, Tim, here's what you're going to laugh at. I can tell you Ty Meyer's name. I can tell you that it was coming out of the north end, headed toward the south stands, coming out on our 5-yard line. It was to the flats to the right, but I really don't remember the exact moment that I found out that I was going to be starting. You weren't just going to be starting. You were going to be starting the game against Michigan. You know what I mean? In your home state. And you don't remember that moment when Coach Tressel said you're the guy. Wow. No, I really don't. I don't remember the exact moment or the exact conversation. It's kind of one of those things that obviously that week was very surreal.
Yeah.
Just that whole process. Everything happening with Steve, kind of last minute realizing that I'm going to actually have a really good chance to get some significant playing time against Illinois, and then doing what I did there in the second half, and what we did offensively.
Yeah.
And then then just it's Michigan week. What's going on? Who's playing? Who's starting? Like I said, right now in my mind, I can't tell you.
Wow.
The exact moment when I found that out. But to me, that's the kind of thing that doesn't matter. The interception to Ty Myers, that one mattered.
Yeah.
The exact moment I found out didn't matter because, in my mind, when you're sitting in that position of a backup quarterback, you have to be prepared at any moment.
Yeah.
And, you had to be prepared to play the week before, had to be prepared to start in Ann Arbor if that was going to be the case.
Yeah. I mean, the process, you were into the process at that point. Take me that game in Ann Arbor. You couldn't have been a better start for you guys. Your first start as a collegian. Are you kidding me? In the big house, but y'all jump out to that big lead. But just take me. Jonathan Wells went off. You made some timely throws, etc. But just take me. What would? Because I'm trying to, people trying to imagine what's Justin Fields going to be feeling or thinking or sensing walking in there for the first time as a starting quarterback. Obviously he's been a starter all year, but still that place is kind of different. But, what were you feeling, sensing back then that you remember? A lot of nerves, few nerves. I mean, what do you remember about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, anybody tells you that you get thrust into that situation, or what Justin and these guys are going to be dealing with on Saturday here after Thanksgiving. But there's always butterflies. There's always that little bit of anxiety leading up to that game or to that moment. I mean, yeah. I had that little bit of anxiety before every game. It's just, you're excited, you're kind of jacked up, you're ready to go out there and play and try to display your skill and your craft to the best of your ability, and you're doing it, in front of 100,000 people, or you're doing it knowing that millions of people are watching. For us going into that game, the big difference, I think, from what these guys are facing on Saturday, and conversely, the same thing, big difference in that 0-1 game versus what we were facing in 0-2. We weren't dealing with high level expectations. Yeah, exactly. Right? We're headed up to Ann Arbor. I'm getting my first start. That was a game that we were underdogs. We were not expected to win. So we didn't have to deal with the kind of that national big picture pressure that these guys are going to be feeling on Saturday, or that we felt at home in 02, which is, hey, this game, I mean, every game matters, but damn, this game really matters.
Yes.
You know, this is,
Yes.
these guys got to go to Ann Arbor and they got to make a statement on Saturday. You know, Justin Fields, Chase Young and company. I mean, these guys got to go out. You got to handle your business. You got to look professional doing it. You got to do it the right way and execute, you know, because right now, with 2 games, you know, left in this season, they're still fighting for that number 1 spot. And, you know, this year especially, that number 1 spot could make a big difference in that first round of the college football playoff in terms of a matchup of who you get. Like, there's no question you'd rather, me personally, I'd rather play a Georgia than Dabo Swinney and Clemson.
Yeah.
You know, so they're going out there with some high expectations and some heavy weight on their shoulders. You know, for us back in 01, you know, I don't know that too many people expected anything, but here's the deal. The great part about football is nobody has higher expectations for those boys on Saturday than themselves.
Yeah.
And nobody had higher expectations for myself, for our offense, and for our team going into Ann Arbor in 2001 than we did. You know, not the coaches, not the fans, not the media, not our parents. You know, I can guarantee you at the end of any game, you know, the players are the ones that know more than any of us that they didn't play as well as they could, no matter what the outcome of the game is. You know, these guys stepped off the field Saturday against Penn State. They knew that they screwed up.
Yeah.
They know it, and they have higher expectations for themselves than any of us do. So, you know, going into that game in Ann Arbor, you know, we expected to win. You know, it's Ohio State football. That's why you come here. You come here to beat Michigan. You come here to compete for the Big Ten. You come here to win national championships. And, you know, a lot of things that season hadn't gone our way at times and moments, and we faced a lot of adversity, but you know, it is still the game. And, you know, we still had an opportunity to go in there and make a splash in Ann Arbor, something at the time, don't think it had been done in, I think, 14 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Since the Earl Bruce game. I mean, bottom line, it was a drought, so to speak. You know, real quick, as you think back on it now, what just went right more than anything else that day, do you think? I mean, number one, I remember talking to Coach Tressel, because that was a game played after Thanksgiving, one of the few times, you know, until they expanded the schedule now. And I remember seeing him on Thanksgiving Day for a little media thing. And as we're walking out, I said, you know, Michigan, this team is beatable. And he goes, oh, I know, you know, and then we separated. And his point was, you know, that wasn't a that wasn't a juggernaut team, and he thought y'all were better than y'all had played the week before, obviously. But what do you remember just went right more than anything else that day in Ann Arbor, Craig?
I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind, there's 2 things that went right that day. One is Jonathan Wells. Before he got hurt, in that first half, J-Dub had, you know, the half of a lifetime. You know, if you could draw things up as an Ohio State football player, and to go out and rush for, you know, I think he rushed for $128 and a couple scores in the first half. I mean, if you're an Ohio State running back and you're going into your last Michigan game, and someone tells you, hey man, you're going to get hurt, but you're going to rush for 130 yards and 2 scores in the first half, do you take it? You know?
Yeah.
I think most guys would probably say yes. And then obviously the other thing that sticks out from that football game was our defense, and just ball hawks, and the timely mistakes that John Navarre you know, put on the board for us as a team. I can't remember exactly if he had 4 or 5 interceptions that game, but it was a lot.
Yes.
And you know, you mentioned earlier, offensively, you know, we played like Coach Tress, you know, did for you know, the greater part of the early part of his career as our head coach. You know, a very conservative game plan, especially when the other team gives you the ball that many times.
Yeah.
But we made some timely 3rd down conversions along the way to keep drives moving. You know, in that first half, a 50 or 60 yard 4th and 2 or whatever it was, run by Jonathan Wells for a touchdown. Yeah. Obviously a key play there, but more than anything, just what our guys up front did, you know, to control the line of scrimmage there, especially in the first half. And then the plays that our defense made to get the football back in our hands a number of times in that game. We're talking about the Ohio State-Penn State game this past weekend, and how the Buckeyes turned it over 3 times and kept it a game. Add another turnover or 2 to that tally, and that's the recipe to lose games.
Yeah, crazy. Hey, as you look back on it now, Craig, I call it the Les Source. I mean, Les Source is the first turn at Spa-Francorchamps, my favorite racetrack in Formula One in Belgium. But it's just like a great classic place, and Les Source means where everything comes from after that, and that's a general definition. But as you look back on it now, did things change in this series from that moment on when y'all sort of like popped the piñata?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at just the general course of
history
of the history of it, you can't deny that. I mean, that's an easy observation for us to sit back and make backwards.
Yeah.
In terms of the real exact reasons why, for me, it's a little bit harder to pinpoint. I think over the last 16 years or whatever it's been, things definitely changed. Then I think our expectations. Obviously, the next year in 2002 was a huge year because that was a Michigan game that mattered. They came into our house, and it was win that game and have a chance to go compete for what we all dream of, or lose that game like so many teams in the 90s did, so many great Buckeye teams did in the 90s, and have to answer those questions. And for us to be able to pull that one out, close game at home, I think it definitely started a trend. And we went up there again my senior year and fought them tough. But Chris Perry, going back to the Jonathan Wells thing, Chris Perry had the game of his life in his last Michigan game.
Yeah.
And unfortunately I think he had 185 yards rushing and a few scores, and we lost that 135-21. But, after that, I think the big difference when you look at this rivalry, and it's a fairly obvious one, and I think we're going to see it again on Saturday, is, getting toward the tail end of Lloyd Carr's career up there in Ann Arbor. For a decade and a half now, Michigan just hasn't had the players.
Yeah.
College football is all about the athletes. It's all about the guys that are on the field and how talented they are. And, unfortunately for Michigan fans, fortunately for Buckeye fans, but unfortunately for Michigan fans up there, they just, they haven't had the talent to compete. I mean, they've got some good players, but, they don't have anything in terms of athletes on the field that team like Ohio State does this year.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's going to be a blowout. That's not to say that, Michigan doesn't have a chance to beat Ohio State this weekend. But, on paper, when you look player for player, recruit for recruit, it's not even close. Yeah. I mean, this Buckeye team is loaded, and we have been more talented for 14, 15 years now.
Great. You win with people, as Woody Hayes said. One last thing, I'll let you go, and I really, truly appreciate you coming on my podcast. If you had a little bit of advice for Justin Fields, what would it be walking into that stadium on Saturday?
Number one piece of advice for Justin, man, just you do you. Yeah. Just be yourself. I mean, that kid is so talented. It's ridiculous. I mean, the way he can throw the football, run the football, his size, his strength. I really think we've had a chance to get that glimpse of his development this year under Ryan Day and that coaching staff, and watching him grow in decision making and getting rid of the football at times where maybe earlier in the season he was trying to make too much. So for me, just go out there and be yourself and just continue to play with that high level of trust in his teammates that we've seen him play with all season, which is just get rid of the football, get it in their hands. Let Chris, let Benjamin, let KJ, let JK, let all these guys there's so many weapons on that field that, he can throw for 5 or 6 touchdowns and not have to throw the ball more than 10 yards downfield.
Yeah.
If they set things up right. Not that that's going to happen, but, just understand that it's such a privilege to be able to play in this football game. Walk out of that locker room the first time, look around and just smile. Just smile and have that confidence in how good he is, how good they are, and just go out and let it all happen.
Hey, as I've told you many, many times, and I'll tell you again, it is always a pleasure, Craig. It has always been a pleasure speaking with you, and that will continue. And I'll leave you with this thought. I mean, I was kind of hitting up Jim Tressel back in 2003 why y'all weren't, 2003, why y'all didn't throw the ball more with the weapons y'all had. You could have been one of those great passers from a passing yardage standpoint in Ohio State history if y'all just let loose a little bit more. But, Tressel Ball didn't call for that, I guess. That's too bad. But that's my editorial comment. But Michael Jenkins, man, he was a talent.
We had so much talent as well back then. And, I would have loved to have had that opportunity and to, be able to go into some of those games with a little different mindset. But at the end of the day, Tim, this football is team sport.
Yeah.
And, as in my opinion, when you're building any team, any organization, if you can get guys to buy into whatever your plan is going to be and to work their butts off to execute it, you have a chance to be successful. And I can tell you, 26 games my last 2 years, and 24 wins. Unfortunately, 2 blemishes on the scorecard. Would love to have those erased and have had that 26 and 0. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade any of it for anything. I mean, it was just such a great ride, such a great experience, such a great group of guys that I got to go out there and battle with for 2 straight years. And be part of the history of this program that kind of got it back, that kind of turned things around. And we went through a few years earlier in my career where we were, marginal, we were average. And, from Ohio State standards, we were below average. And that's not why you signed that letter of intent. That's not why you come to Ohio State. And, we were blessed enough to be a part of the movement that put the Buckeyes back on the map, that put a national championship trophy back in the case. And, I think you look back a number of years later, the guys after us have done a tremendous job of building upon that too.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Craig Krenzel. Craig, I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's always a pleasure, and I'll see you down the road, man. I really appreciate you coming on my podcast.
Yep, sounds good, brother. Always a pleasure, Tim. Take care.
Oh, you got it, man. Ladies and gentlemen, it was Craig Krenzel. I got a little goosebumps there on some of the things he was talking about, including the way, this oil tanker turned around. And now you see what, lo and behold, a lot of modern-day Ohio State fans don't remember maybe the tough times back in the and it weren't really tough times. It was just tough times in the game during the John Cooper era. Otherwise, John Cooper had probably 7 or 8 of the greater teams that ever played at Ohio State. But there was definitely, at the end, Andy Geiger and the powers that be decided there was a change to be made. They went to that change. They made that change to Jim Tressel. Jim Tressel came in with a plan, and there's no doubt that from that moment on, the fortunes, especially in the game and really nationally, turned almost 180 degrees for Ohio State. And I'm going to be back in just a moment to talk with another guy who maybe gives us a little bit more insight into that change and maybe a little more insight into this game coming up on Saturday, because he kind of follows things like that for a living. I'll be back with that little special guest in just a moment.
Hey, college football fans, it's Zach Bourne here. You need to check out BetDSI.com. BetDSI is a great way to use your sports knowledge to make some extra cash. That's right. BetDSI is the top-rated online sportsbook. They've been paying winners for over 20 years. The reason they've been around that long is because they have got the fastest payouts in the industry. Plus, the user interface and mobile site is the best in the business. Play, win, and get paid. It's that simple. It doesn't matter if it's college football, the NFL, NBA, NHL, UFC, esports, reality TV, virtually anything. You can bet it. You can bet on it at BetDSI.com and get paid right now. There's no better way to add some excitement to games that you already are watching. Check out their live betting, where you can bet on games throughout the entire matchup, every play, and every minute until the end. BetDSI has a special deal for Lettermen Row fans. Use the promo code ROW100 to get a 100% bonus match. That's more than double. That's right, more than double your money to start winning today. Once again, go to betdsi.com and use promo code ROW100 and get this limited 100% bonus offer to make some extra cash on the sports you know and love. BetDSI, promo code ROW100. Now back to the show.
Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And speaking of legends from the past, I've got another one coming up here. This young man grew up on a farm outside Chillicothe, Ohio. He was driving a tractor by the time he was 5. He was I've always thought the young man should run for governor one of these days because he had that sort of presence about him, that kind of cool demeanor that you like, and sort of a deep, natural radio voice more than anything else. But he knew how to put things in perspective even as a young man. And I'll just welcome aboard now. Ben Hartsock, welcome to the Tim May Podcast.
I appreciate it. Well, you're showing your questionable judgment, Tim. Politics. I would have been a terrible politician. I'm in a much better field now. I appreciate your kind words, but I would not the space for me for sure.
Oh my goodness, man, that was a Pandora's box, a can of worms you just opened there. I could go all kinds of different directions about being worthy or not, but I digress. I won't get into that. Ben, let's just get right into it. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted you on my show this week is, like I told Craig Krenzel, y'all were part of the Les Source. Les Source is the beginning of the change of the Ohio State Michigan series, I call it the turning of the oil tanker, from 2-10-1 to now 16-2. That's crazy when you think about it. But, is it crazy to you too that this series has changed so dramatically?
Yeah, it is dramatic, and I'm excited about it, and it's gotten so lopsided that there are even people that will kind of say, you know what, it's not as important anymore because it's gotten so lopsided, and I recognize that you need this game to matter for it to continue the majesty that it has.
Yeah.
But I think right now we need 9 more wins to even the score to get us in the all-time winning column. And I do radio with John Jansen, a Michigan player from 97, and I give him a hard time. And I said, listen, Ohio State spotted Michigan like 20 wins in the 18 and early 1900s. I don't like that. So I don't choose to recognize those, but the reality is in that all-time win-loss column, I want Ohio State to get that tilted in the right direction. But just to be a small chapter of that, and like you say, I that's how I describe my experience at Ohio State. The Ohio State-Michigan game was we were the one that drew the line in the sand and turned the tide and got Ohio State on this tremendous run that they've had.
John Cooper, as I pointed out earlier in the show, John Cooper had some of the great teams in Ohio State history. I mean, you look and the talented. I mean, there was a team one time that had Orlando Pace, Corey Stringer, and Eddie George on it. And then in '95, and then in '96, and then in '98, and clearly he recruited. He had great teams, but he was going against great Michigan teams back then too and stuff. But what do you remember? Do you remember, as you look back on it now, was there something missing between the John Cooper prep for the game and the Jim Tressel prep? What do you remember about that?
As you talk about the all-time great teams, Tim, it brought up. I was asking a local guy from Columbus the other day on my radio show the same thing. Where does this current Ohio State team? Where is it going to fall historically with all-time Buckeye greats? And he reminded me of that '95 Ohio State football team with Eddie George, Orlando Pace, Terry Glenn, Bobby Hoying, Ricky Dudley, Sean Springs, Antoine Winfield, Mike Vrabel.
Yeah.
I mean,
Matt Finkus.
Matt Finkus, Luke Fickell, all of those guys. What
Crazy.
An incredible grouping of talent. And time will tell, history will show where this Ohio State team goes, because that '95 team was 11-2, which is a good team, but they certainly don't look as dominant as this year's team. Isn't that fascinating?
I think it's what's fascinating is I remember, I covered Buster Douglas when he beat Mike Tyson and all that stuff, but I covered a bunch of boxing way back then. And, J.D. McCauley was a trainer for Buster Douglas. His line was styles make fights. You know what I mean? You can have a great fighter here and a great fighter there, but this fighter just has what that guy doesn't, at the right time and can take care of business. And I kind of think that's what it was all about back then because, no, you're right. Even the 98 team, 96 with Cassidemore, you're coming on as a freshman. And, we can talk about that ad nauseum, but they couldn't get it done in the game, and what do you remember about, you remember Tressel coming on board, you were around then. What changed?
Yeah.
What changed then?
Well, I kind of think the end of the Cooper era kind of mimics what I've seen the Michigan team having. Last year's Michigan team was a talented football program, and that game, the blowout that Ohio State had, was not indicative of the talent that Michigan possessed last season. But there is I don't know what you'd characterize it, almost as a malaise, just a doubt that creeps into a locker room.
Yeah.
That Michigan has been down for so long now that it's so hard it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy. And I felt that. I feel that more now. I didn't recognize it when I was a student athlete at Ohio State in those years that we were struggling under Coach Cooper. But we also knew the 2-10-1 fact. We knew that we hadn't been able to get past Michigan. And I'll tell you, people always ask about effort and trap games and destiny. I've never bought into that as a player. We practice our butts off every week, and especially for the Michigan week. There wasn't ever anything that was effort lacking of John Cooper. It wasn't a lack of preparation. It was just there was just this doubt that had crept in over the years. Yeah. And you get into these games, and when the talent and the circumstances are so high, balls tend to bounce one way. And when you're, for whatever reason, when you're that team that has let that doubt creep in, it kind of becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. And John Cooper had that, and that was ultimately the end of his tremendous reign as a coach at Ohio State. And it's what Michigan is dealing with now, and their dry spell that they've had here for over a decade. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it was so amazing. One of the most transformative moments I had as an athlete was watching Jim Tressel come in and draw that line in the sand. And the most well-documented example of that was when he spoke at the Schottenstein Center and came out and made his declaration that in so many days you'll be proud of our student athletes in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was at that game as a student athlete. I hadn't hardly even met him yet. Yeah. And I still get chill bumps thinking about that moment, because I realized then, okay, he just put his credibility on the line. Yeah. He just absolutely, as much as a coach can put himself and interject himself into the field of competition, Coach Tressel did that. So that's the most well-documented example of how he drew the line in the sand and says, no more. Yeah. Crazy. Absolutely no more. We're not going to do this. We are going to change the narrative. We are going to change that storyline. But you make that statement, then how do you change it? Well, it became part of the fabric of what we were as a football team. Immediately, the countdown clock went up in the weight room. 300 and whatever days is when we play that team up north. And it became practices during spring and summer. We would have Michigan's period, an extra set of wind sprints, an extra set of practice reps that were focused on Michigan week. So it became a focal point, which is kind of taboo in the world of coaching. It's one game at a time. You don't look ahead. But with Coach Tressel, it absolutely wasn't. It's we're obviously going to be working towards this week's opponent, but every week's opponent involves a little bit of preparing for Michigan. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's crazy because, Coach Meyer took up that same deal. I mean, he took the same approach, kept the countdown clock, took the same approach about they call it the team up north period. And every practice, I mean, if you're ever around, I mean, I remember when I was sitting outside the practice facility last year, when we weren't allowed in and all that chaos was going on about off the field. And,
bottom line is I'm sitting there. They went into the team up north period even then with Ryan Day running the show there temporarily, and it's crazy because I don't know if y'all actually practiced stuff you were going to use against Michigan, but clearly it kept it in the at least maybe not the forefront but the middle of your mind, right?
And you never shy away from it. That was what Coach Tressel did. Is he never he emphasized that specific game, but one of the other unique things that Coach Tressel did is he brought his own traditions that he implemented, the singing of Carmen, Ohio, but he also emphasized those other traditions around the university, senior tackle, and just the importance of those traditions. We did book reports on Paul Brown. We did book reports on different football Ohio State legends, and he really emphasized the history of this university, and that was a part of bringing us back. Is that yes, you're as an Ohio State athlete, you're a celebrity in the state, but there were people before you, and there will be people after you, and ultimately, all you can control is the 4 years that you have to write your own chapter in this great history.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting when you think about it because as players, I think as band of brothers, you want to think like you're playing for each other, but I grew up an Alabama fan. Everybody knows that, and you're playing for people who may never ever get to ever be in Ohio Stadium, much less see a game there. But I think Coach Tressel brought that to bear as much as anybody. That there's more to it than just you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You're a part of a great history, and you get a chapter in that great history.
All right, let's jump real quick. Ben, like you said, you got the Sirius XM radio, the Big Ten show you're on with John Jansen and those guys. You guys keep up with stuff as well as anybody. I've been on your show a couple times. I enjoy being a guest on there, even though I talk too much. But I digress. What is it about this Michigan team that Ohio State fans and the Ohio State team should be wary of?
This year's team?
Yes.
Well, they have seemingly figured it out. There were so many high expectations with bringing in Josh Gaddis and Shea Patterson's development, and there were a lot of high expectations for Michigan. That you look at the Big Ten, especially with Urban Meyer stepping down and Justin Fields was an unknown product before the season. Most people thought that this was Michigan's opportunity to seize Ohio State's vulnerability with an unproven head coach and a transfer quarterback that we don't know.
Yeah.
Well, now that the season has fleshed itself out, we've seen that both Coach Day and Justin Fields are strong. But Michigan tripped over itself during the whole entire early part of this season, but they flipped a switch for the second half of the Penn State game. And it was Jim Harbaugh came out and told the sideline reporter, I believe this will be our finest hour.
Yes.
And that started the turn. They didn't win that game, but since that game, they have figured it out. And as I've talked to Michigan reporters that are around the team day in, day out, it's not been a magic change. It's not been a giant schematic adjustment. It's just that it took longer than expected for this program to get accustomed to the Josh Gaddis way. Their run game has come on. Zach Charbonnet and Hassan Haskins have figured out, and the offensive line, that group is gelling. The wide receivers that we ultimately knew with Tariq Black and Donovan Peoples-Jones and Collins and Bell, those guys, we knew that they were talented, but they're just finally figuring it out, and they're peaking and clicking here at the right time.
Yeah.
So I'm excited because ultimately, again, the Ohio State-Michigan game is always going to be significant. It's always going to be highly contested, but you want your opponent you want your opponent to be at his best, and I think Michigan is a team that really just they stumbled over themselves early, but they've got things figured out, and they're clicking and they're peaking at the right time.
You know how you think sometimes going to a game is going to be high scoring and it turns out to be 10-8, and then sometimes you think it's going to be 10-8, it turns out to be 39-37. What's your take on this, Ben Hartsock, future governor? Possible presidential candidate down the road, but what's your take on this game? Let's have some prognostications.
No,
I don't necessarily need a score, but what do you think this could develop into an offensive slugfest?
No, I think there's going to be a lot of points put on the board. Don Brown's going to have a strong defensive plan for the Wolverines. But I just look at this Ohio State team. Their offensive line has gotten so little credit for the success that this team has had offensively. Justin Fields has executed tremendously, but there are a lot of times where him and J.K. Dobbins are running through holes the size of a Mack truck, and they're not getting touched until 6, 8, 10 yards downfield. And then to those guys' credit, they're able to make moves or run people over to get to take a 10-yard gain and turn it into a 30-yard gain. Yeah. But this offensive line is gelling. So I look at it as being a high scoring affair. Chase Young obviously is a juggernaut right now. And as exciting as it is to see Chase Young and what he's done, he's really cementing his legacy in the all-time greats as Ohio State defenders. I'm excited. Tyreek Smith and Zach Harrison, like there's a pipeline behind Chase Young that I'm excited are getting reps to see them get into a big game and start building their legacy early, right? That's the exciting part of Ohio State and what Coach Day is doing and Urban Meyer has built is when Nick Bosa went down, Chase Young stepped up. And when Chase Young goes on to the NFL, it'll be the time for these next guys. That's the exciting part. But as good as these defenses are, I do think that Ohio State's going to put up a bunch of points. And I think that Shea Patterson is finding chemistry with his wide receivers. And then when you find chemistry with your wide receivers and your run game starts gelling, then you can start playing complementary football. So I think there's going to be some points put on board this game.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Ben Hartsock, one of the great people I've ever met covering Ohio State when I've been covering Ohio State football. And like I said, if he decides to run for governor one of these days, he would have my vote. I'm not sure what party he would be part of. Probably be the Up with Farmers party, but I digress. Hey, Ben, on this Turkey Day week, I really appreciate you coming on, man, and some of the memories you evoked there, especially from the big turnaround of the Ohio State football program in the game, man. They gave me goosebumps while you were talking about them.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Always good talking to you, Tim.
You got it, man. See you next time.
Thanks, man. Yep,
ladies and gentlemen, that was Ben Hartsock. Well, like I said, one of the great people I've ever met, tight end. He actually caught a few more passes, some of these tight ends of the current ilk. Like I told somebody the other day, I think it was my friend Boston Ward, you can't spell T's without T-E. And I think they tease these tight ends now, throw them a few passes every now and then just to make them think they might be part of the big passing picture one of these days. But you know what? I'm going to be back in just a moment with yet another special guest on this Thanksgiving week as Ohio State gets ready to play Michigan in the Big House in the game with nothing really. Well, there's still a lot hanging on the line for Ohio State, although a lot of people think Ohio State is going to make the college football playoff regardless of what happens Saturday, if in fact they take care of business in 2 weeks in the Big Ten championship game. I wouldn't take that for granted, not in the least. But this promises to be a great version of the game, no matter what the final score is. I'll be back in a moment with someone who can help me put that into more perspective from the Michigan side.
Hey Buckeye fans, as the official wing sponsor of your Ohio State Buckeyes, Roosters is giving away 12 trips for 2 to this year's Buckeye Bowl game. Each trip comes complete with airfare, hotel, gift bag, and 2 lower-level tickets. One bowl prize winner chosen each week, along with other cool Roosters weekly prizes. So register every week at your favorite Roosters or at roosterswings.com. Roosters, a fun, casual joint and the official wing sponsor of Ohio State Athletics. Official contest rules at roosterswings.com.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I guess I'm not going to say best for last because the last guest on my show on this particular week is going to be Austin Ward. So the best for next to last is what I guess I would call this, is my longtime friend. We first met when she was covering auto racing. Just like when I was covering the Indianapolis 500, she was too, but then she also started covering Michigan football. Her name is Angelique Chengelis. Angelique, welcome to my show.
Tim, what an introduction. Yeah, we had great times at the Indianapolis 500. That's where we had this wonderful, long relationship, great friendship.
Yeah, and it's really ironic that your husband, here you are, you're from Cincinnati. You cover Michigan football, and your husband, David, is a doctor who graduated from Ohio State, is one of the biggest Ohio State fans out there. How has that worked out over the years?
It's worked out fine. I mean, I think if someone checked out my DNA, I mean, like you said, I grew up in Cincinnati. I grew up a big Ohio State fan, and my sister actually found some pictures of me when I was a little girl. I'm wearing my Ohio State sweatshirt. I got my father's big heart, heart of it all rug. I'm holding it. I've got my finger up, number one. And then I lost the bet. Michigan had beaten Ohio State that year. My aunt was from Ann Arbor, and I had to wear the Michigan sweatshirt she sent me, and I looked absolutely miserable in the second photograph.
What a harbinger.
So, it was terrible. It was, child abuse at that time, wearing a Michigan sweatshirt, living in Cincinnati. But you know what? It's, you cover it like a professional, like you do.
Yeah.
So, I'm just so grateful, Tim, that I did grow up watching this rivalry, and I'm so grateful that I get to cover it. Yeah. And every year I just love this week more than any, and I love that game more than any.
Yeah. It's funny because I got goosebumps where you're talking there because I grew up watching football like you wouldn't believe. And the Ohio State-Michigan game was, I grew up in Alabama and in Texas, and the Ohio State-Michigan game was always on, at the end of the year. I always thought, man, what would we like to be there? I mean, because I'm really into the tradition of college football as much as anything else. And then, like you said, when you get immersed into like actually covering it, you kind of see the warts, behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. But it has not diminished, in my opinion, this great rivalry. And, I told everybody when Ohio State went 2-10-1, all that did was increase the fervor for Ohio State fans about getting it changed, making it change. Now it's 2-16 for Michigan the last 18 years. And Angelique, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't fully introduce her. She's been covering Michigan football for the Detroit News for several decades, even though she doesn't look like it. But but I digress. The bottom line is, how has that changed, do you think, for Michigan fans in their, quote, respect of the series, which appeared to be waning in the late 1990s?
Yeah, I mean, it's, this week, it definitely feels different this week, and maybe last year they were talking about the revenge tour, and I remember talking to some Ohio State people, and I thought that was the year that Michigan would upend Ohio State, and obviously that didn't happen. And this year now that things have been sort of they're picking up some momentum and playing better, and Josh Gaddis's offense, and this is speed and space, and things are happening. There is definitely a different level of excitement among the fans up here. But I will tell you, Tim, I mean, I've talked to a lot of former players in the last week and a half or so, and guys who played in this game and guys who won and beat Ohio State, and they're just, they see so many, really what they focus on is Ohio State. Yeah. And they say, look, they've got All-Americans across the board, and the thing is, if one of them goes down, they've got another All-American to plug in. And that's tough to face, and Michigan doesn't have that yet. And I'm sure that's what they're trying to achieve. But so I think that they look at it with a little bit more of
analytically,
and have better perspective on it. But emotionally, I think I've already gotten texts from friends who are Michigan alums saying this is it, this is the year. So it really depends on who you talk to. I mean, obviously these players want to see Michigan win. It's the 50th anniversary of the 69 win, the Michigan win over Woody and that great Ohio State team, and they're all having their reunion. They're going to be the honorary captains for Michigan. So there is that kind of like, well, is it going to be that? Can they match that? And I just think if you look at it analytically, it's not. Emotion plays a big role, as you know, but it's not the only role that goes into this game.
Yeah, it's so weird though when you think about, it's not like it's been lopsided on the field every year. It's just in the win-loss column it's lopsided. I mean, I go back to the spot. Are you kidding me? That was crazy. Yeah. That was crazy football. You go back to last year, Rashawn Gary was clearly banged up going into that game. Winovich probably shouldn't have even played. And then Devin Bush, maybe, the best defender on the Michigan side from a physical standpoint at that point, gets hurt, and a lot of things go into how things get lopsided. But one thing that definitely played a role was Ohio State's just all-out assault offensively in that game, and that is what has changed so much. I go back to the Bo Schembechler days when I first started covering Ohio State football in 1984, and I was up here for those late games in the Woody Bo series where 10-3 was a hell of a game, or Ohio State didn't score a touchdown in the last 3 games of Woody Hayes' games against Michigan, though he'd held sway in this. You never know what you're going to get. 1995, Ohio State's undefeated with Eddie George on his way to the Heisman Trophy and all those great players. And Tim Batuka goes crazy in Michigan Stadium. So anybody thinks they really know what's coming Saturday, you got to kind of let the game play, right?
Right. You do. I mean, even the next year, 96.
Yes.
In Columbus, Sean Springs slips, Ty Streets. That was a low-scoring game, and then the next year, everybody knows what happens in 97. But, no, you don't know, Tim. And it really – that's the beauty of this game. I mean, you can go back a couple of years ago, Devin Gardner, if he doesn't break his foot in that game, maybe on that 2-point conversion, maybe, they draw up a different play that actually would work.
Yeah.
And,
Thomas Powell still has that football, by the way. Go ahead now.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty wild. And, and a couple of years ago, I thought it was the best game plan I'd seen Michigan call, Pep Hamilton and John O'Corn. He was a quarterback and wasn't their best option at that point. And maybe if you have a different guy in there, that's a different outcome. So I do think some of those games have been closer than you think. Last year, obviously not. But I think they definitely have learned. So they learned from that game. And I think Don Brown, Michigan's defensive coordinator, people said, oh, he's stubborn. He just does he sticks with what he knows and goes all out, Dr. Blitz. But I do think he learned from that game. The week before, Indiana had done the same thing, but Ohio State did it better with better athletes.
Yeah.
And he's adjusted this year, and probably with personnel not as good as last year that Michigan had on defense.
Agreed.
And, I think that they've been better in that sense. So, so many things, everybody knows, so many things go in there. You can't just assume Ohio State's going to come in and march. On paper, I would think so. But, you just can't assume anything going into this game.
Absolutely not. As I said, I always expected Michigan to be desperate going into this game no matter what. I'm talking about way back in the summer when everybody was talking about Michigan being the favorite in the Big Ten East. And I was just sort of getting on radio shows and poo-pooing that idea because I just looked at the talent on hand. Yeah, you had a new coach in Ryan Day, full-time head coach in Ryan Day, and Ohio State had all these new starters on the offensive line, new starter at quarterback, but the talent that Urban Meyer and his staff had put together has come to full bloom now. I think that's obvious to everybody, and yet you knew Michigan has been trying to put it all back together too, but I thought they lost a lot of key personnel that would hurt them in this regard. But what you said has really come about is I'm not sure if Jim Harbaugh said, okay, Josh, go ahead and run your offense now, at halftime of that Penn State game, but a drop touchdown pass in that game, man, we're looking at something special. Otherwise, we're looking at something special on Saturday. Agreed?
I totally agree. And you mentioned that game, and that's when, Jim last week, Harbaugh he doesn't like to pinpoint things like we do. And players, even his players are saying it was the second half at Penn State where they saw a change in themselves. They were down 21-0, and they came back different than what happened at Wisconsin when they got deflated almost immediately when they fumbled deep in Wisconsin territory. They just couldn't get it back. And Penn State showed them they had some grit and they had some guts. And, but Harbaugh says last week, you don't plant potatoes and expect to have potato salad the next day. Yeah. He said it's been a gradual process. And, we did laugh at him when he said after that 10-3 win over Iowa that they were hitting their stride. And, maybe he did see something in practice that really came to fruition in that second half against Penn State, a near miss. They almost had that game-tying touchdown on the fourth down play. And but they have been different. And the other big difference, Tim, is that before then, they had fumbled, they had 17 fumbles and lost 9. And
wow.
And they have not turned the ball over. They had, Shea had a pick last week. And but they've really been protecting the ball, and that's allowed Josh Gaddis to finally get some rhythm in the play calling and get some rhythm going in this offense.
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny because what really almost – well, it didn't ruin it because Ohio State was still better than Penn State last week, but the 3 turnovers were just lost fumbles were just huge, and Ohio State has really not been doing that all year. We'll see if that trend continues. Hey, Angelique, don't you think it's very interesting, as long as you've been covering this team and I have, that we're looking at Ohio State versus Michigan, and we're looking at the quarterbacks. Shea Patterson was a transfer from Mississippi, Ole Miss. Justin Fields is a transfer from Georgia. 2 transfer quarterbacks are at the helm of these 2 teams. Who have seen that coming like 25 years ago? You follow my drift there? I mean, college football has changed dramatically, right?
It really has. I mean, this is the whole, that whole process, and really Shea, in my mind, is sort of the face of that transfer process. I mean, he was really the one who went through it. It was a grueling process. It was 6-7 months of working, and they share the same lawyer. And Tom Mars, and he really, it was a much different process than he thought it would be when he set out, and it took a while to get Shea Patterson eligible, and then boom, here comes Justin Fields from Georgia to Ohio State.
Yeah.
So it is phenomenal, and I think that there's the path going forward for college football is so cloudy right now, but it's becoming clearer that players want to have more say. And we're on the cusp of that, and seeing where that goes with the NCAA and with the California law right now, and it's just a different world. But I say that and you say that, but it still comes down to in my mind, still Saturday. That's it, to me. It's always about Michigan, Ohio State, no matter what's going on outside in the world. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna-ish and everything's right with the world. It's Michigan, Ohio State, but yeah, in those few hours and the days leading up to it, it does feel like everything else going on in the college football world doesn't matter. It's about that game.
Yeah. All right, I'll let you out of here after this. I had you on my first show, my first podcast way back when, and I really appreciate you helping me put my shingle out up on the, hang my shingle out, whatever you call that, whatever doctors do, lawyers do. Real quick, how does this game go Saturday in your opinion? Ohio State's an incredibly talented team. It's probably still going to be number 2 in the college football playoff rankings. Michigan, as I called it, we did a show on Channel 10, down here, Wall to Wall Sports on Sunday night, where we had Shimmy Schembeckler on, Bo's son. And and we were talking about what the difference is for Ohio State Saturday as opposed to Ohio State. And I said, while Ohio State is still playing in a championship mode for a championship season, this is more like a salvage operation for Michigan to salvage a major piece of the 2019 season, when a lot of people had high hopes that this was the year they were finally going to get around the corner. They're not going to play for a championship. But what is your sense of this game on Saturday? Who has the biggest, momentum going into the game? And number 2, what's just your sense of how it'll go?
Well, I think they both have great momentum. I honestly think that was no one wants to face those turnovers like Ohio State did, but maybe that humbled them a little bit. Maybe they saw that they can make mistakes, and they have to find a way to overcome those. And that was probably a good test for Ohio State last week against Penn State. And you think if they didn't have those turnovers, what the score might have been.
Yeah.
And then you look at Michigan, and I go into this game thinking their margin of error is 0. And they cannot make any mistakes, and you can't get behind to an Ohio State team and expect to win. Not like what they tried to do at Penn State. And they gave up touchdowns early to Michigan State and Indiana, and they didn't sweat it. But that's not going to be the case against Ohio State. But in terms of where people thought Michigan was going to be, clearly no one saw this coming. You saw Jim Harbaugh media day saying, "Yeah, that's where I'd pick him," and there's a lot of pressure on him. And I thought, looking at these 3 rivalry games that they had at Michigan Stadium this year, I said, well, if they come out, 2-1, that's pretty good. Well, they've got two wins, but clearly, beating Ohio State is everything for them. And and Jim Harbaugh knows that. He may not express it like other coaches do, but he gave these guys T-shirts in spring ball with the scores of their 3 losses last year. And of course,
Wow.
the biggest one was the Ohio State loss. And some of the guys, Ben Bredesen said he goes, I know what the score was, and he threw it in the bottom of his locker room. Some guys like Sean McCune, the tight end, said hung it up in the tight end room so they wouldn't forget it. So I think that, this is about.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost Angelique. But as she was pointing out, I mean, this is all about pride now. I mean, this is like, can you turn the corner? Can Michigan turn the corner? I always appreciate Angelique coming on to my shows because I've known her forever, it seems like, and she has great insight into the Michigan-Ohio State series, as you just heard there. It's too bad that in this modern-day times with modern technical advances, we would lose her signal on such an important week. But I think she'd made her point. And the thing I want to get into with her that we're not going to get to touch on this is how much heat is Jim Harbaugh feeling right now to make this happen, finally, to make this happen. He was hired to turn the thing around. And he has – I don't know if he's turned it around or not. I mean, Michigan wasn't going that poorly under Brady Hoke, but they weren't winning the game and on a consistent basis except for that one little burp year in 2011 when Ohio State was in a transition from Jim Tressel to Urban Meyer when Luke Fickell was the interim head coach, and a lot of things were in disarray. But I would call this almost like a must-win situation for Jim Harbaugh. If, in fact, his program is turning around like a lot of people have thought it would. I'm going to be back in just a moment to get some last thoughts headed into the game, number 116, with my good friend Boston. You call him Austin Ward. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate, in order, Craig Krenzel, Ben Hartsock, and then Angelique Chengelis from the Detroit News, longtime coverer of the Michigan football program, for joining me so far on this The Game week.
And the podcast.
We're zeroing in right now, I think. Gluman, our able producer, director, and gaffer, is zeroing in right now on the up. And you can see the counting the amount going into today was 101. And just quick memory, which is pretty tough for me now, being 65, I think I've added quite a bit to the largesse. This money, of course, will go to the Christina and Ryan Day Fund when it's all done. Next week will be the last week. In fact, I'll be donating into this because I've got to start saving my money for Christmas shopping.
You don't want to double it for the
my
postseason?
Little grandson, Owen, I mean, he's sitting there already going, well, there goes my super-duper turbocharged tricycle. But anyway, let's get to the final, but the last but not least part of this program with Austin Ward.
Am I batting cleanup or am I just at the bottom of the order?
Buddy, you're batting fourth. That's cleanup.
All right.
And I really appreciate you being on with me again because, number one, I think it's required. But number two,
I don't remember writing that in there.
It's always a slice. But we'll make this short and sweet just because, people are running out of time to listen. They're out there getting ready for Black Friday and, who knows what's coming Saturday.
Don't you think that's kind of how do you like it? I think it's strange that you have, like, we're trying to cover the biggest game of the year for the fans, one that they talk about all year long, and then you have the family day on Thanksgiving. And Thursday, it's not a big day, to read or watch, Buckeye Q breakdowns. You have Black Friday and the shopping. It's like, I don't know. It's just kind of strange that the build-up's not quite the same for it this week.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the build-up, is what it is. If Michigan was undefeated, like a lot of people thought it would be at this point in the season,
yeah,
and Ohio State sitting there undefeated, all people would be talking about over the turkey would be about Ohio State and how it's going to win, or this is the biggest challenge, et cetera. The problem with this game is it kind of reminds me a little bit of 69 and 95. There's a sleeping I don't know if it's a giant up there, but there's a sleeping person laying in wait in the big house who wants to ruin Ohio State's party.
Yeah.
Now, the conjecture is Ohio State can probably still make the college football playoff and lose this game. I'm not sure I would take that for granted based on the way some things go in the college football playoff committees, the way they look at things. But the bottom line is Ohio State is focused on winning this game.
Yeah, and we were kind of touched on that on Saturday night afterwards. It's like not just Thanksgiving of this week, but the fact that Ohio State's already clinched the East. What happened then. Oregon went out and lost. That knocked another team really out of that race. Like Ohio State has this great margin for error, They don't have to win on Saturday for the playoff. Now, if you're the Buckeyes, you're Ryan Day, it's your first one. Guys that want gold pants, obviously they feel like they have to win the rivalry. I'm not trying to equate the two. They're two separate issues. And Ohio State wants to be undefeated, and they want to maintain the bragging rights, this dominance that they've had this century. And, of course, ever since I started covering this team, I don't know any other way than Ohio State winning the game. So, but that part of it is just – it's strange because the national perspective on this conversation is not the same. Here in Columbus and up there in Ann Arbor, the important is the same. Jim Harbaugh needs a win. Ryan Day is going to want to start with a win as he takes over for Urban Meyer. But it's just that there's just that weird feeling because I firmly believe Ohio State can lose to a top 10 opponent on the road and then beat either Wisconsin or Minnesota next week and be in the top 4. I guess the other factor here as we get ready for tomorrow night, Tuesday night, in the college football playoff rankings this week, Ohio State, if it wins the last 3 weeks against top 10 opponents, then you're talking about the number 1 seed, and that could be pretty important. So I'm starting to talk myself back into the stakes being higher. I was, telling my boss, the real boss around here, Will Crawl, earlier today. I was like, I don't know. It doesn't feel the same. The stakes are kind of blah.
Well, that's when you got to watch out, though. I mean, the thing about it is Ohio State. We've all thought Ohio State as this season's gone on. This is a special season.
Right.
It's not a special season if you lose.
Yeah.
I mean, you can win the Big Ten championship and the national championship, but 2002 was special. That was the first team to go totally undefeated. I think the first team to go 14-0 in major college history, and this team has the ability maybe to do that. But I tell you what, man, we'll touch on it real quickly here. The last 2 weeks, there's been some slippage. I mean, maybe they need to get in there and tighten up some bolts and things like that. But I mean, there's been some slippage, and some of it's maybe a little bit of a lack of concentration. Some of it's happenstance. Mm-hmm. Some of it is, fumbles at the goal line. I mean, Ryan Day, I'm telling you, he didn't go home on Saturday night going, man, beat Penn. Well, he was happy they beat Penn State, but those 3 fumbles will eat at him. Ate at him, and I'm sure he's been, but fumbles come in such weird fashions. These weren't guys just dropping the ball on the ground like you saw Tua Tagovailoa do, and some other ways. These were forced turnovers that really, I mean, Rutgers scored 21 points on Ohio State. Are you kidding me? That's still tied for the most
that's pretty wild.
that Ohio State's given up this year.
Yeah.
And Rutgers is the worst team, maybe in a Power 5 conference. Penn State was still in that game on Saturday because Justin Fields dropped the ball as well as he played. Dropped the ball 3 times, 2 of which were recovered and turned into one which thwarted a score and one was turned into a score. And then, of course, J.K. Dobbins fumbled. And that's why it was a game.
I think if Fields holds on for a split second longer on the way into the end zone, that game winds up being 50-0. That was the way it was trending. You saw the way Ohio State was rolling on defense. I think whatever it was, 60-some yards for Penn State in the first half.
Yes.
That should have been 28 or 35-0 at the end of the first half.
Yes.
And sometimes that happens. If you look at it, is it a lingering problem? Is it an issue with the ball security? Ohio State's been pretty good taking care of it this year. I don't think it's a problem. The one that was questionable to me, I thought Dobbins was a little lackadaisical on his, and it's very uncharacteristic for him. And when he came into the post-game press conference, it was like, hey, you think how did you play? How happy are you with the workload and the touchdowns? And he was like, all he said was, I fumbled.
Yeah.
And he was not happy. And that's, I think, a good sign for them taking Michigan seriously, trying to go undefeated, trying to get that number 1 seed, trying to win the rivalry, is that they looked at Saturday, and it was, some people felt good about it just because they know they accomplished something meaningful. But the overall sense was like, Ohio State walked into the postgame. It was like, that was not their best effort and not even close.
Well, no, but they let a backup quarterback come in and run like Juice Williams on them for a while. And, I was talking with Jeff Hafley after the game. Shaun Wade makes that breakup on the last real meaningful play that could have possibly kept Penn State in that game. But if you really watch that play, Ohio State had dropped off into an intermediate zone with Jeffrey Okudah and Shaun Wade, and Jeffrey Okudah passed K.J. Hamler off to Shaun Wade, who was stopped and then was trying to play catch-up back against him. If that ball had been thrown out in front of K.J. Hamler, he might still be running. Yeah. I mean, happenstance comes into play, but the same thing could be said about the first pass that Justin Fields threw deep to Chris Olave in the end zone. just before he wanted to launch it to begin with, a Penn State player got in his face. He had to move away from him. Then he was late launching it. Yeah. I mean, Chris Olave, there was a city block between him and the nearest defender when he first broke open. But that's how football is, man. It's just little moments can be huge ramifications.
And look, you can have a perfect record and not have played perfectly. And
right.
I think that the last 2 weeks are a good example of that for Ohio State. And sometimes, you're dealing with these. You've done this a long time, Tim.
Yeah.
You're trying to predict what happens for 18 to 21-year-olds every week. Good luck to you, because it's hard. They know that Rutgers isn't going to matter to them, and they might play 1 quarter or 2 quarters, then they're going to be done. They know if they're up 21 points on Penn State, they're probably not going to let them get back, probably not going to lose that game. Now, they let Penn State all the way back in it.
Yeah, they
and
did.
had to fight for it. But that's just human nature, is fighting complacency. Even when you're just carrying the football like 36 times like J.K. Dobbins, if you let up one time, he can change the game in college football. And
yeah.
Those are important lessons for them, because they got through that. It was the first time we've made a big deal out of waiting for them to get a test, and they got one. And they found out what it was going to be like for this particular team. It's not like Dobbins hasn't played in big games before. He knows that he has to protect the football. But now that's happened, okay? At Michigan with gold pants on the line, in Indianapolis next week with the Big Ten on the line, and then whatever happens there, if it's the college football playoff semifinal or the national championship, there is not going to be the margin for error against those teams in all likelihood.
Yeah.
And you have to play more closely perfect than they did on Saturday.
Yeah, let's get into this real quick. I mean, we don't have much time left.
Gotcha.
We have unlimited time, but I don't think people listening have unlimited time, is my point. I appreciate the people who listen to this podcast and download it, but I digress. Dude, we're sitting there in the press box. Chris Olave should have had 15 catches on Saturday.
Yeah.
That game plan, I don't care. I mean, people talk about win the surest way and all this kind of stuff. That game plan baffled me from an offensive standpoint. I don't know if there was something that they knew was wrong with Justin Fields, what the situation was. Everything I saw going into that game said throw the ball often. Throw the ball, especially Chris Olave, who could get open in a crowded subway.
Yeah.
I mean, throw the ball. And they didn't do it. And I'm still baffled by what was it, 60 rushes or whatever there were in it?
61, I believe.
61 and only 22 passes. I mean, Justin Fields threw one more pass than his rushes. He had 21 rushes and 22 passes. And I'm just going, I know in the second half it started to rain. Those little ice pellets were coming down. First half was really nice for throwing the football. And they didn't do it. And I'm baffled by that. And I'm looking at the Michigan game and I'm thinking, against Michigan, you're definitely going to want to throw the ball around. I mean, they're pretty good in the secondary, but there are things to be had with Ohio State, as you saw Ohio State versus them last year.
Without question.
With what I thought was a better defense. I'm talking about Michigan.
Yep.
There are things to be had there. So, just give me in 30 seconds. Give me your take on why did Ohio State go that route? Why did Ryan Day go that route against Penn State? Or is that are we going to see that again?
I think there are two things, and so the only explanations that make any sense to me, Tim, are that they didn't respect Penn State's ability to stop the run, and they wanted to prove that they could. That opening drive was a statement. Okay.
Yeah, but I thought the major statement.
No, yeah, you're right. But they were just like, you know what? They can't stop it. Justin Fields is going to start running a little bit more because they think it's a top 10
Let me give people a refresher. Penn State was averaging, giving up 75.4 yards a game rushing. Ohio State had 91 yards rushing on that first drive.
So I think that was part of it. It was coming so easily for them, and there was, even when we talked about the Fields fumble, there was just this sense that the yardage was going to keep coming easily. The blowout was in hand. The defense was rolling, and I think at that point, if you're Ryan Day,
I got you.
You're shortening the game because there's a lot of football and big-time opponents left, and that makes sense to me. It was weird because Chris Olave in a top 10 game should never finish with 2 catches. He has already reached that plateau where he is a superstar for Ohio State, and he's got this knack in big games where the football needs to be thrown his way. I think there were 2 others. You talked about the one into the end zone that he missed. He was the one on the first quarter, right? The one down the sideline. So
ball was thrown short.
It's not like he wasn't targeted, but he needs to have a much heavier dosage of that. And I think once you got 21-0 and into that third quarter, the fumbles switched it around a little bit and things got hairy. But it was like Dave's like, you're going to trust the defense. And it's the first time that's been this situation. So I don't look at it as
okay.
Berm said this on Saturday to us. That was like Urban Meyer was calling it. I think that's a little bit too far. Yeah, that was more conservative.
I thought it was more like Jim Tressel calling it. To be honest with you,
I mean,
win the surest way.
You guys are both in that camp. But
has merit.
I think it just made a little bit more sense for them to shorten that game in that situation, and you couldn't have anticipated that your two most reliable offensive players were gonna fumble 4 times. You're not gonna dream that up.
Yeah. Now going into this one real quick, you have sources, insiders. I have insiders. I'm told that Justin Fields, obviously got bruised up on Saturday, but he's no less the worse for wear. That he's going to be ready to go this week.
Yep.
You got the same idea, right?
That is what I feel.
Okay. Just give me in a nutshell. We're recording this on a Monday, headed toward the game on Saturday, but we have a feel for what's coming. In a nutshell, before I give you my take, what do you anticipate seeing Saturday unfold before your eyes?
I think the full offensive package will be unleashed in a way that we haven't seen. Maybe we thought that was going to happen on Saturday, especially with the passing attack, as we just alluded to. If you're going to play against Michigan and Ryan Day wants to send a message the way 62-39 a year ago, I have a hard time believing that Michigan can score at that level against the best defense in the country, but I don't think that their defense is any better equipped to slow down Ohio State. So Fields, Chris Olave is going to get more balls the way he did in the game last year. J.K. Dobbins, he's not going to get 36 carries, but he's going to have a heavy workload. And we've now seen that Justin Fields, as you wrote last week and predicted and nailed it, that it was a whatever it takes game. The full Ohio State playbook is going to be open on Saturday. And I don't know that they necessarily even need it, but I think that they want to go up there. And I talked about that statement drive against Penn State. I think they want to send a message against Michigan that the dominance with Day is not going to slow down. And you saw him 2 weeks ago. When Don Brown made those comments about how they'd adjusted and how they were ready for Ohio State, you could see the guards go up for Ryan Day.
Ryan Day's face was man. That was a photograph, but you need a definite big cut line under it to understand what he's. I mean, he clearly is champing at the bit. I do believe to unleash something. The bad news is it may be a little bit inclement weather up there is what you're hearing, but I don't think it's going to be where you put the Air Force in the hangar. I mean, I think they feel like they can throw, which leads me to my next point. This is a Michigan team that has found a over-the-top big-time passing game in the last several weeks, including that second half against Penn State. They finally discovered not only Donovan Peoples-Jones, but also Nico Collins is a big-time player. Shea Patterson, you give him a little bit of time, it looks like he can hit some big passes. There were doubts about him for the last couple of years. This could be this Ohio State defense's stiffest test to date.
I've got 2 points there. I'll try and make them quick. But
okay.
One, do you remember we talked to a head coach of some famous repute? It was either late in August or early in September, and he now analyzes games on a major network.
I think it was early October, but go ahead.
He analyzes games on a major network, and he was talking about this Michigan team and the offensive. I mean, this person tried to recruit a number of these wide receivers to add to the offense, and he couldn't understand why they weren't getting the football, why they weren't being used as often as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, because Michigan cannot run the football. They still can't.
No.
Harbaugh, try as he might, it's not working.
I mean, everybody's excited about Charbonnet and the other kid, but
the other guys, those 3 guys.
We're not talking about the same kind of defense.
And Peoples-Jones in particular, this particular coach loved him from the moment he saw him in high school. The guy is special. Okay, so that's one factor. Just kind of an anecdote about why Michigan should have been moving that direction.
Also, hey, we can name him. His name's Urban Meyer.
That's okay.
We were having a little talk with him, but the thing is, he said pretty much the same thing on Fox, and you're right.
And so, but here's the other point as it relates to this particular matchup. If you're going to run those deep routes that you're talking about, you have to have time.
Yeah.
They are not always fast developing routes there, and Shea Patterson needs to stand. Spencer Holbrook has pointed this out on a number of times when we've watched Michigan in the last couple of weeks.
That's glooming.
I'll give him some credit for that. Not that it's breaking news, but you don't have time when Chase Young is coming at you. You don't have time when Tyreek Smith and Devon Hamilton and Jayshon Cornell, who was a ball of fire on Saturday, you don't have time for a deep developing route.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If that's how Michigan thinks they're going to beat Ohio State, it's not going to happen. And if you try to have you try and take a bunch of deep shots with Jeff Okudah and Damon Arnett and Sean Wade, and then Chase Young coming at you off 7 sacks in those last 2 games for him, he's going to feast, and he'll set another record if you try and throw all day.
Well, maybe you do that when Chase Young isn't in the game, with Ohio State switching those lines up like hockey team.
But you say this is a hold nothing back game?
Yeah. Chase Young plays 70 plays on Saturday.
Good luck taking Chase Young off the field.
And the other interesting thing, I would agree with that, but, you always have a moment. There's always going to be a moment where it's going to be a moment where you're going to have a shot at that kind of play. Whether this game will be close enough for that to matter, like I said, 69 and 95 stick out to me as games that Ohio State should have handled and didn't get it handled because you never know what, like you said, 18 to 22-year-olds are going to do.
Right.
In a certain situation, how the weather's going to play a factor. Like I said, a split-second difference can make a whole lot of difference in the way a play develops, et cetera. And I've seen some really capable Ohio State teams stumble, and I've seen some capable Michigan teams also stumble in this game because it is a rivalry for a reason.
Yeah, I think I have these conversations with Berm all the time, and he has a completely different perspective because – when he was you've been through the whole course of this rivalry for a long time. You've seen the ups and downs on both sides. When Berm was getting his feel for the rivalry, it was in the 90s. And so he always gives Michigan the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
He goes in with thinking it's the worst things could happen for Ohio State. When you talk to me about this game, I've seen every Michigan quarterback be hyped in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
I've seen all this offseason hype that they're going to be the team that's going to unseat Ohio State.
Transcend.
That happened again this summer. And now I've even seen this where the last 5 weeks, they're like, Michigan's got it figured out. Look at the way the offense is rolling.
Yeah.
I've seen it every time since 2012. Is that the longest time anyone has? Is it the biggest sample size? No. But every time I've heard it, and every time I've seen Ohio State answer the challenge, you can't convince me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't around when that was happening in the 90s and the more talented Ohio State teams were falling short. Until Michigan actually beats Ohio State, I will not believe it can happen.
Well, here's the thing. I was just setting you up there because, just want to get your take on it. I truly believe Ohio State takes care of business on Saturday. This will be the best team by far Michigan has faced this year.
Right.
Number 3, Chase Young. Maybe we're talking about him way too much. Chase Young, the 2 biggest games of this year so far are Wisconsin and Penn State. You could put those two highlight reels, the way he played in those 2 games against the best competition the Big Ten has thrown at them so far, the way he dominated moments in that game. This guy is for real with an exclamation point at the end. As Braxton Miller used to say, for real?
For real.
You got that right on Chase Young.
Yeah.
How are these other guys going to play? Remains to be seen. Is Justin Fields. Justin Fields for real. He proved that to me the last several weeks, but especially carrying the ball 21 times. Yeah, he fumbled 3 times. He got hit on all 3 of those in certain different ways. He got up and made a point to walk off the field after that last hit he took on Saturday to show that to me. I remember Chris Spielman used to say, unless my leg is broken, I'm going to walk off the field. I'm not going to let you have the satisfaction of thinking you've knocked me out of the game. Justin Fields has that kind of moxie about him. He has that kind of toughness, and I had Craig Krenzel on as my first guest today in this podcast, and Craig Krenzel was tough, man. Jonathan Vilma hit him about as hard as you can hit a man on a football field in that national championship game, and Craig Krenzel got up.
Yeah.
I think it was on a touchdown, as a matter of fact. So that's what I've learned about this football team going along. But more than anything else, where Ohio State fans, I think, should have faith is the fact that this offensive line is one of the elite offensive lines I've ever covered at Ohio State. Josh Myers has emerged into one of the great linemen out there in the country. These other guys, too, are playing at an extremely high level. That's where I think you take – I don't know if you're an Ohio State fan, you take comfort going into this game that push comes to shove, this offensive line has been able to get it done.
And Wyatt Davis, one of the offensive players of the game for Ohio State last week, that guy has taken a huge leap. You might be concerned if you look towards the future beyond Saturday that Ohio State's going to have to replace both of those guys if they jump to the NFL.
Yeah, but that's next year. I'm talking about this
year.
That's
something we can talk about later. But, it's a cliche for a reason. You're going to win this game, you're going to win the trenches.
And by the way, Ohio State replaced 4 starters on the offensive line from last year.
Yeah, not any foreshadowing there.
Yeah, foreshadowing our podcast in January.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. But if you're gonna pick a better offensive line, you take Ohio State's. If you're not gonna pick against the Rushmen with Chase Young, and I already rattled off all their names without even throwing in Landers or Tyreek Smith or Zach Harrison. I mean, my goodness, the role he played on Saturday in a big game.
Ran a guy down from the backside on one play.
I've said it over and over. I didn't think it was going to happen for him as a true freshman. But when you talk about all that stuff, Tim, I was like, the last 10 minutes, 12 minutes, I'm more excited. It's starting to feel like that rivalry week and the other stuff about the playoffs drifting away. And I'm getting more excited to be up there on Saturday and cover this game because it's always – Angelique said this before I came on. I was listening in and, how special it is to get to cover it, for how much it means to Ohio State's fans, how much it means to Michigan fans that it's all year round. It's an honor that we get to do it and talk about it and break it down. And now I'm getting pretty excited.
And as the old saying goes, you may think you know what's coming. You don't know what's coming. I mean, like I said, 69-95, I keep going back to those. Mm-hmm. Last year, Ohio State scored 62 points on Michigan.
I did not predict that.
Ohio State scored 62. Well, they only won by 23, I mean, people forget Michigan scored 39 in that game. Bo and Woody must have just been going, just like the game of the century in 2006. You thought that was going to be like maybe a 17-14 game. That was as great a game as you're ever going to watch from a scoring offensive standpoint. So you think you know what's coming. You don't really ever really truly know what's coming. My personal opinion is Ohio State holds sway in this game. Maybe I'm not sure the 9-point spread is inaccurate. I think Ohio State holds sway and maybe wins by 2 or 3 touchdowns when things really get rolling. You never know. But that's the kind of feel I have for this Ohio State football team. This is maybe the most complete team I've ever covered at Ohio State.
Yeah, if Michigan scores 39 points on Saturday again like they did last year, however much they score, I'll put it in the cup.
You'll match it?
I'm not going to match it because you might just run me out of here. But I can't see that happening. Ohio State's defense is too talented, and the turnaround, as you said, I mean, from the 39 that gets kind of overshadowed a year ago, I think you'll see the real difference in what they're doing. And Greg Madison and now Washington, they're going to have some incentive to play well in this, get their guys ready for that too. So it's not just Ryan Day. Those guys will want to prove that their defense, and it's not just Don Brown and all that stuff. And there's a lot of, hey, I could keep going. The motivation is there. Like I wrote about it in the 5 questions on Monday. That, like, is Ohio State going to be ready? Does this matter to them? It does. It's just a weird thing with the playoff and a national championship not being impacted. But
1996, Ohio State wins at Indiana. Big play at the end of the game. I think Andy Katzenmoyer knocks the ball loose and Matt Finke scores on the fumble recovery or vice versa. Mm-hmm. I get that mixed up in my head. But Ohio State ends up clinching the Big Ten championship that day. They're walking all around the field with roses clenched in their teeth. And one of my best friends, Jeff Snook, who's been on the show, called me next day. I can't believe the coaches let them put those roses in their mouth. Don't you understand? They're playing Michigan. They're playing for a national championship. And lo and behold, Ohio State, with Joe Germain starting for the first time at quarterback, which everybody had been calling for many weeks, scores 3 field goals, is up 9-0 at the half. Ty Streets catches that touchdown pass to start the second half when Sean Spring slips. That only made it 9-7. But then Michigan goes on and wins that game. And Ohio State, even though it beats Arizona State in the Rose Bowl, is denied a national championship because maybe it took for granted what was going on in the game. Yep. Don't ever take for granted what's going to happen in the game. And I'll just leave you with that thought, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate my good buddy Boston Ward coming on the week of the game as we talk about Ohio State, Michigan, the 116th meeting. Something's going to surprise you on Saturday, but who knows what it's going to be. But until next week, this is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buck IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.